All right, so these are lessons from a recent movie, The Lost Bus. So The Lost Bus talks about the sudden chaos of a sudden wildfire evacuation. And the movie's based on a school bus driver and children that were escaping California's 2018 Camp Fire. So I'm going to give you some emergency preparedness takeaways and what qualifies me, I guess, to give this. There's probably plenty of people who are better qualified than me, but I was in the Navy. I am in the Navy. I'm a reservist. This has nothing to do with the Navy per se. Obviously, they're not endorsing any of this. This is purely me as an individual civilian. But I did serve quite a bit of time in an expeditionary unit, and it made me into, I guess, what you'd call a prepper. And because of that, I've been able to help my HOA and a few others help themselves to get ahead of the likely threats that are going to plague all of them during the next foreseeable disaster, namely a wildfire, but also an earthquake, which they're saying we have an over 70% chance of it, over 7.0 earthquake occurring within the next 30 years. And that's probably a conservative estimate. So what is the downside to preparing? Well, the downsides, if any, a little bit of money, a little bit of time, are a no-brainer when it comes to the downsides of not preparing. So I'm using these videos as vehicles to get you hopefully into the mindset of what has happened. This is not hypothetical. This is based on what happened in 2018 during the Camp Fire. So the first opening scene is, everything is normal. And that's how these disaster movies almost always start. There's subtle warning signs. There's like an eerie glow in the sky, and there's some ash drifting down, kind of like snowflakes. And the teacher, Mary, feels her eyes burn and her chest is tightening from the smoke, but doesn't see the fire. And this is very relative, very related to actual disasters where you don't get advance announcement oftentimes. And in November of 2018, when this happened, Paradise residents woke up to kind of an eerie sight. There were dark skies, and this was supposed to be during daylight. And it tricked some people thinking like, oh yeah, maybe it could just be weather that is about to rain. But because this has never happened before, and because people have normalcy bias, we always assume, almost always, that, well, something that hasn't happened before won't happen. Nothing ever happens until the first time it happens. So here's what went wrong. In this case, as in many U.S. emergencies, the delay in recognizing danger and the lack of clear alerts cost lives. So in Paradise, the emergency officials never sounded a town-wide alarm. And they relied on phone alerts. So people, signed up for the apps, which they were supposed to do. They relied on phone alerts. But because of the power outage, which at first might have been either because of the fire that took it down the electrical towers, the infrastructure, or because the power would shut off, such as what PG&E and other utilities do. They do a preventative safety power shutoff. So if the infrastructure is not on backup power, the cell towers and other infrastructure, even if the cell towers are on backup power, which most of them are, because some of the key infrastructure may not have been powered, people didn't get the alerts to the conventional cell phone channels. So there were no sirens, just like in Maui, which happened about 5 years later in 2023. Similar story there. Authorities didn't activate the sirens, but they posted alerts on social media. Few people saw those, especially if you're at work and you're not supposed to be on your phone. That is an example of a failure to communicate, catastrophic failure. So because the power and the cell service went out in both these instances, the Paradise Fire in 2018, the Maui Fire in 2023, there were no signals, there were no warnings. Through the modern means, many people, both in Paradise and Lahaina, had no warning at all until basically the fire was in their neighborhood. And once the fire is there, then it's predictable chaos. It's as close to living hell as you could get, where you don't know what is around the corner, if you can evacuate in the northern direction or south. If you are in San Diego, you can only go so far until you run out of land and you hit the water, which may not be such a bad thing if you're avoiding a fire, Worst case scenario, that's a body of water that's not going to burn, the ocean. And that also is a pretty clear-cut direction. You know to go west. That's something we'll talk about in a minute. Where to go, where to start planning. But the point here is don't rely on a single official alert. You want to develop your own early warning net. And for wildfires or earthquakes, you want to be able to sign up for obviously all the local alert services, but also have a backup like a weather radio with solar power or USB power or hand crank radio, because many of the emergency broadcasts will be broadcast over the NOAA weather stations when they can't reach you through conventional channels. Don't assume that the delicate internet infrastructure, the delicate cellular infrastructure is going to be up and functional and manned. So even if the cell towers or the internet or power is down, NOAA, the NOAA is what I'm talking about, can still give you alerts. And even though there are risks to evacuating and there's risks to staying in place, if you can get ahead of it, if you think that there's a chance that you're going to have to evacuate, maybe some of the surrounding areas are already getting the alerts, it's not a bad idea to just get out while you can, because several advantages will happen. One, the roads won't be as congested yet. Once everybody gets the alert, especially if there's a mandatory evacuation, what do you think is going to happen? Cars that are designed for maybe a few hundred at a time are going to suddenly have thousands, maybe tens of thousands, all heading in the wrong direction, combined with high emotionality, total frantic chaos, people not able to think clearly because they're overcome with emotion. If you can get ahead of that, and also if you can get a hotel out of the immediate area, so maybe you're evacuating from wildfire, well, you don't want to get a hotel right in that area. Maybe you can get on the phone and start booking a hotel 1 to 2 hour drive away. The gas stations won't be totally chaos. They won't be totally overrun. The power will still probably be running, so you can pump gas if you don't follow the mantra of never let your gas tank get below half the tank. So if you can act early, worst case scenario is that you evacuated your family, you have relatively clear roads still, you're ahead of the mandatory evacuations, you probably can book a hotel that is in a safe distance away. And the worst case scenario is that it was all for nothing and you got some extra practice for evacuation. And chances are you will recognize all the things that you forgot to bring during that mock evacuation that turned out to be. So next time you'll have a go bag packed and ready. If you didn't have one at all, well, you'll fix that. You'll recognize all the things you forgot, the medications, the important documents, phone numbers, phone charger, entertainment for your kids, your pet supplies, and many other things that you won't even know that you're not thinking of, that you're not remembering until you're forced to remember them. So if you can also get walkie-talkies, not just the cheap FRS, but GMRS or ham. Some of those have NOAA built in. They also have other emergency stations that you can pick up through AM or FM. That's a great idea. A lot of cars now don't even come with AM radios anymore, and that could be a trusted method for getting communication to you sent over long distances. So you also want to be able to establish an out-of-area contact. I call it like a key swap, where you have family members, if you're in San Diego, family members in Orange County or LA, doesn't have to be family members, just people that you trust. You have access to their house, whether it's a key or electronic key, or they have a key hidden for you outside, and you've done the same for them. If they have to evacuate south, they can go to San Diego. If you have to evacuate north, you go to Orange County or Los Angeles. So if you wait too long, you're not going to have emergency shelter. The hotels are all going to get booked up, and then you're going to be stuck with a FEMA camp, Red Cross, and that's where we go back to the movie of Lost Bus. So people were being shuttled at first to a schoolhouse, which completely burned up, again, based on the true story of what actually happened in 2018. And then they went to an emergency, it looked like a Red Cross camp. And okay, you know, that could be an option, but there's a better option if you plan ahead. And even if you have to use those emergency camps, if you've planned ahead and you have a go bag, you're going to be, at the very least, much more comfortable. But at the worst, most desperate, it could be the difference of life and death. If you have life-saving medications that you require or life-saving emergency equipment, it makes sense to have spares. It makes sense to have them in a kit that can be grabbed and left with. And you should try this at least once a year. Just, I know you're probably not going to do it, but you know you should, and hopefully you will. Pick a Saturday or Sunday when everybody's off. Tell yourself, find some incentive that you'll all go get pizza afterwards. But you just want to see what it would take to evacuate and see how many items you would have forgotten. I guarantee you'd be surprised. And the more you do it, the better you'll get, the fewer items you'll forget, and the faster you'll be able to do it. And you also want to decide on predetermined meeting points. So for my wife and myself, we have several meeting points. And one of them is, it would all go in order. So obviously, if we can't go home, we would go to point A first. We would wait there as long as it's safe. And then if it's obviously not safe, we would go to point B. But the first one has water, which we can filter. If all you need is basically a jug of water and a life straw, and now you can filter water out of a reservoir, a lake, any non-salt water, non-chlorinated body of water. Running water is better than stagnant water. But the point is, in the movie, you'll see how the kids on the bus run out of water, and the teacher, fortunately, is able to take a very risky move, go into a trailer, find some water. But these are all things that can and should be thought of ahead. You're going to need water. You're going to need water immediately. You're going to need food, but you're going to need water more quickly. You're also going to need, most likely, some kind of way to evacuate not just a burning house, but a burning community, like it was in this movie, where Matthew McConaughey burns his hands. They're suffering from smoke inhalation, fortunately. He's quick thinking. He cuts up some fabric out of his jacket. He tapes that over the vents. He wets the fabric, so it creates an impromptu smoke barrier. But you can get a smoke hood. You can get a hood that filters out most of the toxic chemicals that are so prevalent that are going to burn. And they say over 80% of fire deaths are from smoke inhalation. It's not just that it makes you cough. It's horribly toxic materials from your mattress, from the fabrics in your windows, you know, the blinds, the curtains, the carpets, the rugs, all these things that are not designed to be inhaled in a smoke form. And not to mention the heat. So it'll singe your face, it'll singe your eyebrows, it'll cause major skin damage. So if you can get a smoke hood to protect your face and those of your family, they're relatively cheap. You can get them on Amazon. If somebody asks, I'll include a link. And also you might want to consider welding gloves, not just regular gloves, certainly not latex gloves because they can melt to your skin, but welding gloves because they're long. They will cover your hands and your forearms. And what's the first thing you're probably going to do in a burning house? You're either going to burn your hand on the doorknob or burn your hands trying to clear out debris so you can get to your car. Matthew McConaughey got a pretty bad burn on his hand, as you'll see in the video, in the movie. And let me also talk about normalcy bias. So in the first 10 minutes of this movie, there's an inherent and intense normalcy bias. Normalcy bias is basically just, oh, yeah, it's probably fine. It's probably normal. And that's where people will get themselves into very bad problems by just procrastinating, assuming that something that never has happened won't be happening. Again, nothing has ever happened until the first time it happened. And then when it happens and you weren't prepared, it's probably too late. So after about the 10 or 20 minute mark, the bus driver, Kevin, realizes that the school has to evacuate. And then that leads into a scramble for the kids that have to load the bus. There's panicked parents, and then there's gridlock. So, you know, if the parents could immediately realize, okay, there's discretionary evacuation suggestions. These are guidelines. These aren't yet evacuation mandates. Maybe it makes sense to go pick up my kid from school, pick up my pet if they're at home or at the dog daycare or at the groomers, and let's just go. Okay, worst case scenario, they missed a day of school. Worst case scenario, I paid for a dog groom that I didn't get my value from. Okay, that can be dealt with. What can't be dealt with is if You wait until everybody else gets the same alert, and then the roads are absolutely gridlocked. And that's what kills. Smoke and gridlock. What happened in Texas a few years ago, I think it was Hurricane Rita, uh, more people died from the evacuation than if they would have just stayed home. So basically, more people died from the evacuation than people died from the hurricane directly. So back to the film, you could see that within about an hour of the first evacuation order, roads were just completely gridlocked. Okay, cars were at a standstill, and that's when the fire is encroaching. And then the firefighters can't get through. They're trying to clear wrecks. It's just predictable chaos. And then, it goes to like 3 hours. People, hundreds of people, are trapped in their cars. Some people have just started to run. They've left their cars, which adds to more gridlock because now you have a combination of cars with drivers in them and a combination of cars that are just ghost cars. Nobody's in them. They're just blocking intersections. So Hurricane Rita, as I was talking about, that was in 2005. And so what happened there was 2.5 million people from the Houston area tried to evacuate at once because they had learned some lessons from Hurricane Katrina, and highways basically became parking lots for dozens of miles. And drivers faced, in some cases, 24-hour drives just to go 100 miles. So the number of people who died in the gridlock just from evacuating was 107 evacuees. And this is from heat stroke, dehydration. There was a bus that caught on fire. And the number of people who died from the hurricane during Hurricane Rita in 2005, only 7 people. So again, the evacuation was deadlier than the storm. Also, you had people running out of gas. It was over 100 degrees. Medical emergencies were occurring. People couldn't get medical help. There were no shoulders, there were no exits. Everything was just chaos and congested. And that taught emergency managers that an uncoordinated, everybody leave now order can be a foreseeable, predictable disaster. So what sometimes they're trying to do now is break up the orders so they don't have a repeat of Hurricane Rita. And that's probably what happened in the Paradise Fire. But what happened there was they didn't evacuate everybody thinking they were going to avoid a repeat of Hurricane Rita. But that meant by the time that these cascading evacuation orders hit in Paradise, it was too late for the people at the receiving end, at the end of those cascades. And in some cases, they couldn't even get alerts out because the infrastructure at that point was fried, like literally fried. So in Paradise, the officials had no plan to evacuate the whole town at once, and they tried to evacuate in zones. But when everybody hit the road together, that's when the system broke. And also Paradise had very narrow roads and dead ends. They weren't built for mass exodus. And that is where you want to start figuring out what are alternate ways to get to my house if the roads are congested and I need to rescue my kids, my pets. Pets obviously should be a lower triage. I love my dogs, but they have to be a lower triage than actual human family members. And you also need to know alternate ways to get out of your town. So in Paradise, they use some pretty clever improvisation to blast through fences. Places in Texas, people use farmland, orchards. They just drove wherever their trucks, in most cases, because it's Texas, could take them. And that's one advantage to having one car in your arsenal that is four-wheel drive or has higher ground clearance. It gives you more options to get out of town when the actual tarmac roads, the paved roads, are no longer options. So you have to act early, you have to act strategically, and you also need to know at least 2 ways out. And you also have to have at least a half tank of gas or at least a good EV charge. And if you can evacuate with an empty gas can, because you can't store gas that long. Even with a fuel stabilizer, you're not going to get more than a year. So if you can take an empty gas can for your trunk, that fuel won't be spoiled because there'll be no fuel in it. And then to the extent you can get away, then fill up when you're in a relatively safe area. The gas station should still be operating. Fill your tank and fill that gas can because you don't know what's going to be happening next. And now is a good time to also pack your car with evacuation supplies. So look at what they needed in this film. They needed burn protection. They needed fire protection. Okay, so they needed water. They had no water, and that's going to be one of the first things to go. They also could have used some snacks. They could have had a better first aid kit, headlamps, rechargeable USB lights, a fire blanket. You can have a wool blanket, which is usually very flame retardant, and that can protect you as a fire blanket. It also can keep you warm if you have to be camping in your car and you've evacuated. If you're at a FEMA camp, they've run out of blankets. You know, a wool blanket in your car can be very useful. You also want to have an extra phone charger for your car because the one you have may have failed. You want to have an extra phone cable. USB cables are going to be like gold during an evacuation. When people left without their charger, they need their charger so they can power their phone, not just to use for communication, but because we have all of our insurance documents, we have our records on there. Yes, it's a good idea to print them out, but it's also, I think, a better idea to have them in the cloud, because eventually you'll be able to get to a computer where you can print those out or at least access them. You're limited to the physical four corners of the document if you've printed them out. It's not a bad idea to have them, you know, in your go bag, such as who your insurance agent is, your physician info for yourself, for your kids, what prescriptions your family members are on. But I prefer to have things in the cloud because unless that whole server farm burns down and there wasn't redundancy, it's usually going to be accessible, even if all of your computers and all your papers burned up. And stay in your car until you can't stay in your car. That's one of the things that Kevin did wisely with the kids. They stayed in that school bus. And imagine if those kids had to evacuate. When it gets to the point where they're driving literally through fire, that school bus turned out to be kind of an ideal vehicle because it's kind of overbuilt. They're extremely rugged. They're obviously designed to carry a lot of people. And you can see how much damage that thing suffered. Even when he took the air filter out, because it's diesel, it still was able to survive. Maybe internal combustion gas could still, but it just coincidentally turned out to be a very useful shelter. And it basically saved their lives. That school bus saved their lives. So GPS is useful until it's no longer working. GPS through scrambling can be scrambled. There's examples of what happened in our own country where there was a truck driver who was accidentally scrambling GPS because he didn't want to get caught for something he was doing, and it actually interrupted GPS signals by nearby airport. So if it's an evacuation because of something other than a man-made disaster, I'm sorry, because it is a man-made disaster. In other words, like terrorism or some kind of nuclear attack, you may not be able to rely on GPS. You should have a paper map. You should know some old school compass and map skills. And you know, if you live in California, it's pretty easy to tell which way is west because that's where the ocean is. So everything else is pretty easy to figure out. If you're on the East Coast, the Atlantic is on your east, pretty easy to navigate. If you're at night, you can figure out where the North Star is by the Big Dipper. These are things you might want to start learning now, okay? Like, what's the downside? You have a new skill. And then going back to the film, so Kevin's bus is now just in an apocalyptic scene. Like the daylight has turned to midnight. There's black embers that are pelting the windshield. There's fire on both sides of the road. They're burning homes. And this is where you can start to see how people who found themselves in these conditions did not survive, could not survive. I mean, it shows actual footage throughout the film of real videos of campfire evacuees driving through just hellish landscapes. That's how you can understand that 85 people died. Many of them were in their cars or homes, and many of them were killed by smoke or flames. And once you're surrounded by fire, your options are very few. So it meant that paradise evacuation failures meant that some neighborhoods couldn't get out in time. People sheltered in parking lots. Some people even just jumped in a swimming pool as a last resort, which is not inherently a bad idea. If you can get to a lake, then if you're completely surrounded by fire, you can just go further and further into the water and wait it out. Wait, W-A-I-T, and W-A-D-E, wait and wade it out. And you'll have a basically inexhaustible supply of drinking water if you have at least one type of emergency water filter. So there are, obviously the life straw is okay. There's a survival filter, which is a water pump and filter. There's also tablets. There's a whole bunch of things. I have videos on them that I've posted before, but this is high level. I'm not going to get into the procedures for any one method. You can look at my other videos or send a comment. I'll show you the links. But learn how to purify water. There's even ways to purify seawater now using like the Quench C handheld water purifier. That's a handheld desalinator. So another lesson is that if you find yourself in the belly of the beast, there's fire around you, the disaster is in full force, you have a few things you can do to maximize your survival odds. And a car or bus can be like a protective cocoon temporarily. It offers some insulation from heat or smoke. If you have a Tesla, it can prevent the outside air from coming in, has like bioweapon safety mode. That's something pretty unique to Teslas that a lot of people don't even realize they don't have. And that can use HEPA air filtration to prevent those embers from coming in. And you know, if you're fleeing a wildfire, it's best to just get to an open area, like a golf course that's well protected from trees. Maybe there's a water hazard. That's probably not going to burn, but it's risky. How are you going to get there? Can you get there safely? If you live in an HOA with a golf course with a water hazard, that might be your best bet. And if your car is stopped, if you're in just gridlock and the flames are approaching, you have to make that split-second decision. Do you evacuate on foot? Is there a nearby clear area you can get to, like a covered parking lot, a lake, a large field you can run to? And most professionals would say that it's better to shelter in a cleared area than to try to outrun flames in an uncleared brush. And in the lost bus, the adults in the bus, Kevin and the teacher, had a plan to abandon the bus only if absolutely necessary. And then they were going to pair the older kids with the younger ones and keep a roster to keep track. That was also a pretty smart thing they did. It didn't seem that important at the time, but they had a roster. They knew exactly who was there, which is going to be absolutely imperative. You got to pair the kids up and you have to know who was with you, kind of like in a military squadron. You need to know who your folks are, because how are you going to know if you left somebody behind if you don't even know a head count and you don't know the names? Okay, so at the very least, get a head count so you know that we can do a quick head count. Okay, we had 33, now we have 31. We need to figure out what happened to those two if we can, if it's still safe without risking everybody else to do that. But again, smoke inhalation is known to cause up to 80% of fire deaths. And if you just breathe hot, toxic smoke for just a few minutes, you're going to be incapacitated. And we talked about how Kevin, you made an impromptu smoke filter. Talked about how you can use a smoke hood. You can get them on Amazon or other emergency preparedness suppliers. A half-face respirator, like a P100 N95 mask, is only good to maybe filter some smoke particles, but they won't stop the carbon monoxide. Smoke hood can. And they're not bulk, and they're not that expensive. And they can protect your face from the devastating heat. We talked about fire blankets. You can get a dedicated fire blanket that is similar to like Nomex, or a wool blanket might be okay. And welding gloves, right? Similar to like Nomex gloves that firefighters use. It's a no-brainer to have these. Why would you not want to have that protection that you probably will need so you don't lose one or both of your hands? And then how else are you going to get around without that dexterity? So when the communications are down, fortunately, there was a working radio, walkie-talkie. That goes back to having alternate communications. So if you have a T-Mobile cell phone, now many of these have Starlink built in. So when the conventional infrastructure is down, the cell tower is down, you still might be able to communicate with your other family members or other T-Mobile users who have Starlink. And you don't have to have Starlink separate. It's built into the new phones now. It's a feature from T-Mobile. The advantage of that is that you get text messaging, not only as I just talked about, when the infrastructure is degraded, but if you have to fully evacuate to a really remote area where there's no cell signal at all, there never was, Starlink through your phone now allows you to text other individuals, and they don't even have to necessarily be on Starlink. They don't have to be on T-Mobile. You can send and receive messages to other cell phone users that have working cell signal, even though you're in an area where there is no cell coverage, because T-Mobile has linked with Starlink. It's a great feature. And the phones are not going to work. You cannot expect that conventional internet, conventional phones are going to work and save you. You have to be ready to have alternate communications. That's where you may want to consider ham radios. You may want to consider using walkie-talkies to be able to communicate with their family if you have to split up, if that's absolutely necessary. There's an example of like Hurricane Maria, 2017. That's where Puerto Rico's cellular network was almost entirely down, 95% down. Millions of Puerto Ricans had no service for weeks. Also in the Northeast blackout in 2003, cell networks were overwhelmed in hours. And in Maui in 2023, that knocked out power early, and that prevented many residents from getting the alerts that they needed. So how do you communicate when no bars is the reality? So you want to be able to have passive communication, receive information from NOAA radios that are USB power, solar power, hand crank, but you also want to be able to communicate outward. And that's where Starlink, especially if you have Starlink as a standalone unit, like on your RV, as many of them are equipped now. If you have an RV, you can add Starlink to that. You can carry a portable Starlink kit that could be part of your grab and go kit, not necessarily something you would carry around your car all the time, but if you can grab it, it's lower priority, but it gives you communications where now you have internet almost anywhere you can provide power to your Starlink antenna, and now you can get real-time updates. You can send and receive emails. You can usually make phone calls because it's low orbit, so low latency, so you can make phone calls through your Starlink. The T-Mobile I was talking about earlier, that's only for texting right now. But there are ways to be able to communicate when the cell towers are down. You're going to be surprised, maybe not. It's totally foreseeable and expected how many people are completely unprepared when something that is as foreseeable as a wildfire or an earthquake happens. And all the things that we've relied to work, of course, 100% of the time, power, communications, suddenly don't. And people are going to panic. So if you can get backup power for your house or even for your car, if you have to evacuate, even if you don't, if you get an inverter for your car, you can turn your car into a generator, and that'll power, small devices. But if you can get a power station that you can feed into your house with a transformer panel, it's going to allow you to keep your fridge running. Even if you don't have, one of these panels installed, you can still bring in a portable power bank that is solar powered. These are pretty large, they're wheeled. EcoFlow, Goal Zero, they all make them. And that, if you have the shelter in place, you can power your medical devices, you can power your fridge, your freezer, so now your food doesn't spoil. You can power your pressure cooker, your air fryer, so now you can cook the food that does before it spoils. You can tell your neighbors, hey, bring your food in, I'll keep it in my fridge and freezer, we'll all share it, I can cook for you all, we'll all be better off because of it. And you'll see in the video that burn care is imperative. So you want to get a burn kit, ideally burn specific, like burn dressing, hydrogel pads, burn gel. There's emergency kits that you can get that are pre-made. I have videos on what to put in your burn kit. And you also want to have some kind of trauma kit. So trauma shears, nitrile gloves. This is where you would use the nitrile gloves. Trauma shears are like EMT scissors to cut through clothing, a tourniquet, and then learn how to use it. Take a Red Cross course if you can. At the very least, watch some YouTube videos at the very least, but try to get some professional instruction. And if you know that your family members have allergies, maybe they could go in an anaphylactic shock, you better have an EpiPen in your go bag, and you better make sure it's not expired. So it's better to have two than one. It's always better to hear something twice than none at all. I hope you have found things that are non-obvious, that are helpful, Make sure you have flashlights, not necessarily battery powered, but USB rechargeable, because that gives you multiple options to recharge from your car, from a solar panel, from a power station, at an emergency camp. If there is power, you can charge it obviously from any power source, but even from your laptop, if you have your laptop with you, those have very large batteries in them. But again, your car has USB now. Modern cars have USB-C, have plenty of USB-C cables, because in the next few years, it's already happened, but the next few years, everything's going to be in USB-C. So you're not going to need those Lightning or micro USB cables anymore. You still should have a few combo ones just in case, but make sure that you have the ability to get in touch with someone outside the emergency area. And it was just kind of dumb luck that in this film, they were headed the right direction. They went through basically this wall of fire. It's one of the like scariest sights that they basically like drove out of hell. When you look in the rearview mirror from school bus that Kevin is driving, played by Matthew McConaughey, in the rearview mirror is like almost literal hell, right? Figurative, but almost literal. It's a wall of fire that they just drove out of. You imagine what that would be like to turn around and go back into? It's like midnight fire hell. And it's dark. It's dark because there's so much ash, so much soot, so much smoke that it turned daylight into night. Also, don't forget about your pets. Make a pet plan, a pet kit, and make sure that you have the ability to use your equipment. You've tested it. Even if these are expendable, like you've used your smoke hood, okay, buy another one, replace it. Make sure anything you've removed out of your emergency kit is replaced. But don't be afraid to use it, to test it, to break it in a fail-safe environment. That's what we did in the military. We broke things in a fail-safe environment so that we could figure out what our vulnerabilities were before we were forced to figure it out in the hardest possible way. So my name is Nick. This is something that I hope might be helpful. The film is pretty good. And I think it was made by Greengrass, whatever. He's made some pretty entertaining films. It's not a particularly relaxing, feel-good story, although it is at the end. I mean, the fact that this is based on a true story and the people that it depicts are still alive today. One of them is a school teacher, I think. It's incredible that they did things correctly, both intentionally and coincidentally. So you can start to prepare now. Use what you learned. Don't have to learn it from me. Just learn it. And there's no time that's better spent on recreation, on 1 weekend a month, 1 weekend a year at least, than it would be spent on what could be saving the life of you, your wife, your husband, your children, grandparents. What could be more important than that? You've seen all kinds of disasters in California alone, let alone throughout our country. And the trajectory that things seem to be on is that they're going to be more severe and more often. And at the very least, if you can also shelter your house, get it hardened from wildfire. There are systems that you can do, like Ember Pro, that's an automated fire sprinkler that can not only get you a discount on your insurance, but can prevent you from getting canceled and non-renewed, as is also another threat in California. Obviously far lower of a threat than the actual threats of losing life, but it's an added benefit of it can save your life in worst case scenario, and in a far more benign scenario, save you on your insurance and save you from getting non-renewed for your homeowners. Okay, that's outside the scope of this video. Thank you for your time. I know it's valuable, and I hope you find it useful.